Mark Susnow, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, thank you, David, for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this, and I think that we're going to have a very insightful experience. So, thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's my
I'm
pleasure.
ready for you.
You're ready for me? Okay. Well, I tell you, I may not be at full speed here. I have a cold, not a cold, I think I have the flu, and I'm in my 8th day of the flu. So
Wow.
just to let listeners know, if you hear any snuffling, nose blowing, or coughing, that's what it's about. But you've got good energy, and it brings my energy up. So I think I'll be able to sustain right through this interview. So
Well,
you've got a very interesting background, which has culminated most recently in your just released book, The Soul of Uncertainty, A Fable for Our Times. Now that's an intriguing title, but before we get into it, let's go through the important milestones in your life and that have led up to where you are today as a coach, as an inspirational speaker, as a podcaster, as an author. You're doing a lot of things there, buddy. Oops, I called you buddy.
yeah. Oh, stealing my character there, huh, David?
Yeah, I wasn't. That was totally unconscious.
So,
So tell us a bit about your life and how you got here.
well, I guess the question is how far back do you want me to go? I mean, I could go way back. I mean, I think if I looked at the significant events of my life, I think was losing my dad when I was 6, and I started
Oh, that's
to
major.
wonder. You're a psychologist, right? And started to wonder. I think first thing came to me was survival. When it was, how are we going to survive? And
Mm.
what I started to wonder was, because I was just getting into sports, was who's going to take me to a game?
Yeah,
That,
right.
it's the weirdest thoughts we have.
Yeah, well, as kids, we're pretty, the world revolves around us pretty totally. So it's definitely possible to have both that major grief and disorientation and for that survival self to come up and say, who's going to drive me to the game? You know, how's my
Right.
sports career going to go? Where did you grow up anyway?
I grew up in San Francisco.
Okay, not far from where I am. I'm in Sonoma County. You're in Mill Valley?
San Anselmo now.
San
Yeah,
Anselmo.
lived in Mill Valley, and then after my father died, my mom was sick, and then a few years later, I was sent away for 2 years to military school,
Oh my
and I
goodness.
think that really shaped me a lot. I think I
In
think in some
a good
ways,
way, in a good way or a bad way?
well, what I've learned to do is to kind of look at everything in a good way, in a positive way, and I think that there's so much what I wrote about, so much uncertainty and unknown in the world, and we're disappointed a lot. And I think that the ones that are the happiest are the ones that can kind of take those things in stride. And I think my experience, losing my father, being sent away for 2 years, I learned about being self-reliant,
Uh-huh, yeah.
how to fight for myself. And I think in a way it's helped me now in this period of my life, because we know life continually changes and evolves, and things happen to where I've I just got to this point, and I think that's part of being around for a while, is that I'm usually pretty happy, and doesn't mean things aren't going to happen and I'll be disappointed, but I think with every disappointment we have a choice in terms of how we
I
see it.
I totally agree, and try to remind myself of that frequently. It's a lesson slow learned, and one that needs to be reviewed every now and then. And fortunately, also, you and I are in a phase of life where I believe happiness kind of comes up again. Supposedly, the years of middle age that are fraught with career and early family stuff, our happiness in general kind of takes a dip for a while. But when we come up to this a little bit more clear sailing space, we can get a little happier. So I'm glad to hear that's how it's gone for you. And it's interesting that going back as far as the childhood experience of going to military school is that you say, well, now I feel like it's helping me, or it has helped me. And so it's interesting how our perception of something that's in the distant past can really change as life changes.
Right. And I would say that what you just said is my perception has changed. I mean, I didn't think that way all the time. I only until recently, when I wrote this book, that the soul of uncertainty, that I started looking at everything in more detail, and I see other people that I know struggling with things that to me is it's the way it is. I mean, I've had a lot of loss in my life, and but I've also, I think that, you know, to experience richly and fully all of it,
Yeah.
and you feel the pain, you then feel the joy, and you have a greater capacity to experience joy. And
Yeah, that's one of the things I appreciated about your book, and that made it possible, frankly, for me to read it, is that um, I know it was written in some, I think it was written in some ways to be an inspirational book and to give people tools to be able to orient to the difficult
exactly.
things in life. And and a lot of times I think books of that genre don't acknowledge the challenges and the difficulties of life. And so I really appreciate that you kind of meet those head on, and you share them through this character. So I just want to let you know that's one of the things I like.
Thank you.
Yeah. And did you have spiritual influences as you were coming up as a
I
kid?
did.
Yeah.
My grandparents were Orthodox Jews.
Okay.
I remember as a 6-year-old, 4 or 5 years old, going to temple with them, shul, and I, you know, remember sitting where nobody spoke English,
Hmm.
and being there, and that was an influence about their belief in God. But then when my father died, you know, I saw how distraught they were, and this whole idea of, you know, having faith, and then they lose a son at a young age. You know, my dad was like 35,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
um, you know, it got me to question about God, and if there was God, you know, why did this happen, and
Sure.
that whole thing. And then I was bar mitzvahed, and I didn't want to be bar mitzvahed, and my mother, I wanted to. At the time, the Pop Warner Football League team in San Francisco played before the 49ers played. This is when the 49ers played in Kezar Stadium. And
Hmm.
I wanted to play in Pop Warner. And my mom said to me, well, I'm not going to let you do it this year, but if you get bar mitzvah, I'll let you do it next year.
Dangled that over you. Yeah.
So then I did that. I got bar mitzvah, and I don't know how much of a spiritual experience it was, but then the next year, my uncle was a Shriner, and there was a Christian mystical sect called D. Malay. And so
I've heard of that. I've heard of it. It's a spinoff of, it's an organization we're all familiar with. I'm blocking on the word now. It's the youth arm of, can you help me?
the Shriners.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did that. So I did like 2 things where you read a lot of text and scripture and in a row. And then of course, then I was, you know, totally intrigued by the counterculture. And
By the what system?
counterculture.
Counterculture,
Yeah.
yes.
Then I
Yeah.
like, my family had this strong influence on me. They wanted me to be a dentist or a doctor like my father. So, I mean, you don't know me very well, but it's like I do not have very good mechanical skills.
Ah,
I have other,
okay.
you know, a lot of other talents, but fixing things and seeing that way, which is
Yeah.
a mismatch. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. and I got talked out of that. And I actually went to dental school. I struggled to get in there. I flunked out of it.
Now,
And then
why did you want to be a criminal lawyer? And
I saw that movie Inherit the Wind, about
oh,
the
okay.
Stoll trial,
Uh-huh.
and I said that's what I want to do.
Okay.
And I want to be like Clarence Darrow.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah,
that's what the
good.
movie was about. And he's defending, against the whole thing about evolution and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was William Jennings Bryan was the prosecutor.
Yeah.
And it hit me, and that's what I wanted to do. And I got talked out of it by my family.
Hmm.
Because back then, being a lawyer wasn't really happening. It was like for them in their
Yeah.
eyes. But
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do. And so I went to dental school. I flunked out, and then I pursued that career, and I did that for many years. And it was very fulfilling and exciting. And I was, involved in some really high profile type situations in terms of social change. So I've always been into social change, wanting to make a difference. But during it all, I had this despair. I got to this place to where, with all the notoriety I was getting, I felt something was missing, especially when my first marriage dissolved. And
Hmm.
that was a wake up call to kind of look at, who am I? And that got me on my path to starting to look at life and getting in this personal growth path that been on ever since. And then I got into transcendental meditation in my 20s.
Uh-huh.
And I still meditate like this
Yeah.
morning, I meditated and did yoga for about an hour. I
Yeah.
do that almost every day.
Wow. Good for you. Now, how long did you practice as an attorney?
Oh, probably, you add everything up with passing the bar, law school, about close to 30 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And I tried a lot of cases. And, but the thing that saved me was the meditation and the yoga. And I was also a musician. I played music from the time I was 6 years old when my father died. My mother's got me into music, and I've played music almost every day of my life.
Wow, that's great. And what do you play?
Well, I play several instruments. Back then, I played the clarinet, and then I, got into the saxophone and the flute. And then I did some performing with playing guitar, and then I had a jazz group for a while when I played the horns. But I always wanted to play the piano, and that's what I do now.
Oh boy, I mean, I'm jealous of your musical
I've been
career.
taking lessons for 5 years. And
Yeah.
It's kind of a way to find peace and focus. And
Sure.
so I do that every day.
Totally believe that. Now you kind of brushed over something rather quickly. I thought I heard you say, and illness, about the leaving or disillusionment with the law. Was there an illness in there that was pivotal?
No.
Oh,
No.
I guess I didn't hear that. Okay. So what was the process of making that transition from from being from the transition away from the law? I mean, getting into the law was probably challenging enough, and it's hard to let go of something that is your bread and butter and your ego
Right.
is built around and so on. Tell us about that.
Well, in the beginning, being a lawyer really fulfilled me. And I remember one day, right around when my son was going to be born, I was arguing a case before the California Supreme Court. We'd actually lost a trial, and we appealed the decision. We won in the Court of Appeals, and the California Attorney General's office appealed to the Supreme Court, and they granted a hearing. And I remember my mother was in LA seeing her grandchild. My brother just had a child, and my son was going to be born soon, and any day. And I was arguing this case. My client had run out of money. He had no money. Here I'm arguing this case and not getting any money for it. But I wasn't going to drop the case because that's just not who I am. And most of the real intellectual work was done, and I'm very comfortable being in front of people. So to me, it was something I really wanted to do. And my mother said to me, honey, I wish you would do some other type of law. You're so brilliant, instead of representing all these criminals. And by then my meditation practice had deepened, but I realized I could never support a family doing what I had been doing. So I got into, my career shifted, and I got into more civil law. And after a while, I became very successful at that. But I realized that it was just a business. And if it was just a business, it wasn't, in other words, there was no longer any idealism.
Yeah. And so it wasn't nourishing your soul.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you begin to realize that, and how did you transition out of it?
Well, I think transitioning out of it was, I had to make a decision, and I told my associate in '97, with the new millennium, I honestly think that had there not been a new millennium, I mean, this is all speculation, I would not have done this. But the new millennium was so symbolic, and so this concept of a new millennium was so powerful. And you think about how, 2,000 years ago, supposedly there was the birth of Jesus and the Messiah, and, throughout, so many people would talk about, we're going to have a doomsday with the year 2000, or we're entering the age of Aquarius. And by then I had explored a lot of this inner rich counterculture stuff. And so with the new millennium, I thought about it a lot. And by then my career was going really well financially. And I started to think, what would I want to do if I wasn't a lawyer? And I started to have that thought. And I told my associate, I said, if things go well, we renewed our lease for 3 years. I said, things go well, I'm probably not going to, in the next 3 years, it was a 3-year lease, I'm probably not going to renew our lease. I don't know what I'm going to do.
You had no sense of it. Now, your book seems very autobiographical, because pretty much the hero of your book, who you've named Buddy, has followed the trajectory that you've just described. He loses his father as a kid. I think there might have even been a mention of military school. He becomes a lawyer. He's a musician, and he journeys through the 60s and 70s, and we kind of follow him through that period. So, how autobiographical, not autobiographical is this book? Well, maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know.
Well, some of it is inspired by real life things, like you said, losing my father, being sent away. And a lot of it is based on true experiences, but in other areas, there's more of a composite about experiences that I've had. And I think I get inspired by all of it, and kind of put it together. And the beautiful thing about a fable is that it isn't autobiographical. If it's autobiographical, then you lose the ability to kind of put into what you really want. And I, like you, I have a radio show and a podcast, and I'd interviewed somebody who wrote a book kind of like a fable. And I said, if I write another book, I do not want to write another just pure self-help book. What I like about making it a fable is that, first of all, there's a plot to it. There's a lot of twists and turns, a lot of unexpected things. And also it's more enjoyable because it's like an adventure, it's inspiring, and you get to make it the way you want, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to do, I had written, by the way, an autobiography years ago that I never published.
Oh.
And so this is what I wanted to do. It gave me a certain freedom to also really to show how things keep showing up in your life. So it might be inspired an idea. There might be an idea that I go ahead and then take off on it, and kind of certain things to make it more of a teaching journey, and more fun, because I think there's humor to the book. A lot of people have read it. They said there are parts of the book that they just cracked up.
Uh-huh. I struggled with the subtitle, A Fable for Our Times, and I was kind of put off by that, and it's probably just me. It's a personal bias. pet peeve or something, I'm wary of of things that want to teach me in a
Right.
way that are somehow cloaked in a story.
Hmm.
And so that was my first impression of, oh no, that's what this is going to be. Fortunately, you write well enough that I got pulled into the story and kept reading and reading and reading and ended up reading the whole book, so that it had a way of holding my interest and making me want to see, okay, what are the next steps in the adventure and so on. And certainly the teaching part came through very, very loud and clear. Fortunately, it was all stuff that I agree with.
Right.
so,
Yeah, yeah. We're the
so
same choir.
yeah, so it was palatable for me, and we'll touch on some of that stuff. Did I noticed at the end of the book you thanked the people who supported you during the process of writing the book. Did nobody else raise the a red flag about a fable, or was everybody else on board about that?
People love, I mean, before I had a novel journey, it was kind of a pun or double entendre,
Uh-huh.
but I never liked that. And I love the fable for our times because I feel it is a fable for our times, because we have to look at life now and kind of look at this world with there's so much uncertainty now, and people are freaked out by the election. A lot of people say your timing is perfect, and a fable is, in a way, is something that there are lots of books, by the way. I mean, probably the genre would be like magical realism, and there are lots of books like this, like The Alchemist is one.
I
The
wasn't able to
Bill,
read that. Everybody loves that book. I
yeah,
did not read it for the probably that same thing that I just said.
yeah.
Yeah,
The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, The Celestine Prophecy. These
yeah.
are all books in this genre. The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. These are books that I liked, you
Yeah.
see, that had that style. And I
Uh-huh.
wanted it to be a teaching book, but I didn't want to do another self-help book because I did that with Dancing on the River, Navigating Life Changes, which I
Okay.
talk a lot about my transition from lawyer to coach.
Yeah. Yeah. So a fable for our times, and indeed we are living in a time of uncertainty, I think, of change and uncertainty. Now, I got nailed by some of my listeners on a recent interview where my interviewee was very clearly on the left side of the political line, I guess. And I have to confess, as am I. But my listeners expect sort of a fair, balanced approach, I guess. And but I think everybody would say that we are living in uncertain times, regardless of which side of the political divide they're on, and that there are challenges uh, in terms of how we communicate with each other and where we go from here. So share with us your thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, that's a good insight and a good question. I'm glad, because I was gonna interrupt you anyway
Oh, okay.
and say what you just asked me to say.
Oh,
So thank
good.
you for saying that. I It's interesting. I've been writing a monthly newsletter called Letters on Life for about 14 years, and somehow I came across one I wrote in 2005, and I started about, everybody says this is a different era. We have greater challenges than we've ever had before. There, and I looked at that. There's more stress than ever. This was written in 2005, and I think that almost every year, every era has these challenges, and that they've never had before. And I know, there was a program on CNN did a program on the 60s and the 70s, and I watched that. It was on Netflix, and they
I saw
showed
that.
the Kennedy assassination,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, my,
Oh, yeah.
and so I think there's always going to be great challenges, and I personally, yes, there are, but I don't think that this is like unique, that we've never had great challenges before. And look at our some of our relatives that have World War II and the Depression. And so there's always great challenges. And I think that there's always going to be great challenges no matter who's in power. But I think what has to happen is that, and that's why I think my book is so timely, because as a fable, it takes a story of a person living a whole life, starting as a child, showing these concerns he has as a young boy about survival, coming about, am I good enough? And I think this idea, am I good enough? It keeps coming back our whole life. And can I do this? And am I going to come across okay? Will they like me? Will I have enough money? And to show in a life in terms of a child growing up, going to school and falling in love, will I find true love? Will I find meaning? Will I find purpose? He decides to do something, and after a while that doesn't fulfill him, and he's going, what else do I want to do? And he has disappointments and heartaches and relationship disasters, and it's this idea that's real life. And so to talk about something in the abstract, to me, just didn't work anymore. You had to show somebody's life, and the only way to do that was through a fable of how this person goes through life, a real life, and how does he cope with that?
Yeah.
And what skills does he learn that helps him get to that place to where life is much easier.
Yeah.
More fulfilling.
Yeah. So, maybe you should share with us some of your tips about how we do that.
Well, I think that the biggest thing for a lot of people is that this idea that if right, things were different, only if so-and-so was different, that one, or only if I didn't do this, or only if, or something like that, right? Only if, those words, only if this was different, only if this didn't happen, only if I had this. And that just gets in the way. We have to more or less, in the book, there's this character Blues, who Buddy meets in Big Sur, and who is a musician, and Blues always says it might not be right or might not be fair, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
To accept that life is a certain way.
Yeah.
And to quit complaining that life isn't fair, because life isn't fair. But what's interesting about life not being fair is that sometimes it works to your advantage. When you really analyze it, certain people are born with, let's say, certain athletic skill or certain musical skill. Is that fair that they're born with that? Somebody else is born into a family with wealth, right? Is that fair that they are? Well, sometimes that kind of thing, a life not being fair, it works, like I say.
It's what we do with it, right? That really counts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Whether we've been given a lot or we've been given a little, there's still choice. And that's something you underscore in the book. And one of the things that I cheered about, because, that's sort of an insight that I've arrived at finally in my life, is to realize that. I wanted to share a story with you that kind of comes up right here. Was at a point in my life where I was facing a critical choice. I had gotten a job at Sonoma State University, which was the place I wanted to be to teach a new sort of wide open humanistic psychology back in those times that you were referring to. And then I got a job offer to go back to the University of Michigan, where I'd been very comfortable and had a lot of friends, and it was hard to leave that nest, if you will, to come out to California. And so I was flattered to, have this offer from the University of Michigan, which is, a high prestige school compared to, at the time, Sonoma State College. And I agonized over that. I did journaling, writing on both sides of the question. And I did Gestalt dialogues with myself, talking to both sides of the issue. And I went to the sort of wise old Jungian in our department. And what he said really has stuck with me. He said, David, you're coming at this as if there's a right answer, as if there's a right choice and a wrong choice. And I'm not sure that he even went any further than that. But, what I got from that, either then or sometime later, was the strong realization of, oh, it's up to me to either to go one way or the other and to make it work.
But I like that idea that there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's
So it didn't matter if I stayed at Sonoma or if I went to the University of Michigan. Either choice could have turned out to be disastrous or wonderful, and a lot of the determining factor of what would make that difference was me. It was up to me.
I think that you asked me like, what are some of the tools? And this kind of leads into another way of looking at it is you have both are good choices.
Yeah.
Both are good choices. And when I first, like I say, when I made this transition into becoming a life coach and all the other things I do, I already have my meditation practice.
You already had your
I already
meditation
have my
practice.
meditation
Yeah.
ready for many years.
Right.
And also in the morning, I focus on what I'm grateful for. But what I added was to be curious. And so when I wrote Dancing on the River, which is around this transition, I talk about, these 8 principles of navigating change. And the first one is to live from your center, which meditation helps you do that. And then the second one is to be grateful.
Yes.
And I see a whole science about being grateful because it changes your focus from what you don't like or what you're disappointed by to what you like and what is right. And as we know, what we focus on expands. But the other part of the morning program is to wonder about what the highlight of your day might be.
Yeah, I like that practice that you described.
Yeah, and with the idea that there's always a highlight, no matter what, there's always going to be a highlight, and it's an amazing practice. I mean,
so to reflect on what's going to be happening. I think I actually tried it yesterday or today. I don't remember.
So
but I sort of took that on. I think I was looking forward to this interview, and I was thinking,
right.
well, this will be the highlight of my day. And yeah, so what is it about that that leads towards happiness, equanimity, whatever, about that practice of anticipating your day and sort of pinpointing one or two places that you feel like those could be very gratifying?
Yeah, you're always in that question, right? You're always in the question of where is the good. So you could be instead of looking at what's going to go wrong and what's going to come up, because stuff all the time comes up and there's snags. And I was actually trying to upload. I have a leadership book too, and we're uploading it to this website as an ebook. And my daughter was helping me, fortunately.
Yeah.
And all these things coming up, and I was starting to lose it. yeah, I'm starting to lose it. So she's able to handle it, and I was glad she was there. But there's always going to be stuff to come up. But if you're also looking at, rather than thinking about your day, thinking about, well, wow, it's really stressful. This came up. You think about, wow, what the highlight was. And the highlight was we got it uploaded. We had dinner together. I got to hang out with my daughter, and to just not focus on what goes wrong. And I would be in these depositions, and sometimes they could be brutal. But after a while, I got to the point where rather than thinking about the deposition, about the other guy, the lawyer, what a jerk he was, I looked at, what the highlight was.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that high moment. So you're looking for the good. And that's why I said with your choices, they were like to see that, wow, I got 2 good choices. I used to have on my voicemail for many years is I used to say, you've reached Mark Susnow and Inspire Possibility. And remember one thing, happiness is a choice. Yeah. And I think happiness is a choice. And it's just, you can yeah, you just can focus on what makes you happy. So anyway, that's my morning practice, and I just think
Mhm.
that it's a great practice, especially the highlight of the day,
Yeah, it's
because you're
interesting because I have heard of looking back at the end of the day and finding things that you're grateful for.
right.
This sort of turns that around, and instead of being retrospective, it's prospective.
Exactly. Yes. And by the way, you brought this story up with your, about going to graduate school with, psychology and Sonoma State. The person that suggested I get into coaching is a psychologist.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
he knew me when I was a lawyer, and he said, with your law background and your spiritual background, coaching would be a great fit for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was the one that inspired me to do that.
And how did you move into coaching? I mean, I agree with him that those that background in meditation and
Right.
being a lawyer does provide a nice bedrock and your native intelligence and so on. Did you go through any kind of training or certification program?
Well, what I did was I didn't want to I went to a career counselor
Okay.
to to see I didn't want to just jump from, I wanted to have, before I would stop being a lawyer, I wanted to have, something to go into. So I went to a career counselor, and this is in '99. Nothing came of it. So I started to question whether I should do this, because I've given up. I have 3 young children, a substantial career. I had, responsibilities. And then I had a friend, and he said to me, why do you need into the career right away? You were a lawyer a long time. And then I remember reading a book that at the time, my wife at the time had talked about, called 1 Year Off, to where this family took their kids out of school and they traveled for a year. And I'm thinking, well, I can do that. We're not taking our kids out of school. We're not traveling, but I don't have to work for a year. And I could
Uh-huh.
just kind of reflect on what
Wow.
the next step's going to be. And my friend had suggested the coaching. So about a year later, I was in Kauai. We used to live there. And I called a coaching school to enroll in one of their programs. And I got on the plane. I was with 2 of my kids. And we stayed about a week later than normal, because I figured we're there. And my wife went back with one of the kids. I stayed with a couple others. Their school didn't start till later. And I get on the plane, and this guy comes up to me, and he goes, I remember you. You're a lawyer. You're a musician. And you live in Marin. He said, I met you at a storytelling workshop for lawyers. And I said, well, I haven't been a lawyer for a year. And he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm thinking of getting into coaching. And he said, well, call me if you do. And so 3 months later, I took my first course and called the guy, told him, hey, I'm starting this whole process. And he became my first client.
Wow, that's an incredible thing that he came to you with that much trust right out of the gate,
Right. And
based on this one course that you had both been in. That's impressive.
this is before I took the course even. He said, hey, I like to talk to you if you do.
Uh,
And he remembered meeting me. It was about 10 years before. But it turns out he also was a trial lawyer and a musician. And he loved storytelling. And through him, he arranged a few talks I gave, and I met other people. And that's how this whole thing started. And I took
Interesting.
some basic introductory courses in Miranda, the Coaches Training Institute. And then from there, it just, I kept meeting people that wanted to work with me. And I started writing my monthly newsletter, Letters on Life. And what's interesting is a lot of people are hesitant about putting themselves out there. And my first thing was about writing a newsletter was, what am I going to say?
Right.
What am I going to say? And who's going to want to read it? But there was the other part of me saying, you need to do this. And so I remember I was in Kauai, and in Princeville, I was walking along, I had a doctor's appointment there. And this particular doctor, he had all these motivational quotes on the window in his office. And I said, "Hey, Art, can I get a copy of a couple of these quotes?" And he said, "Sure, let me I'll make them copies for you." So my first newsletter was one of these quotes. It was on attitude. And I basically did a group email, sent out a group email. I wrote a couple of introductory sentences, say, "Hey, this is my first newsletter. I was walking around, saw this in the doctor's office about attitude," and added a couple of sentences. Because at the time, I didn't have the confidence that I had enough to say without it. Now
Right,
here it is,
right.
16 years later, I've just written my third book.
Yeah, yeah. Do you find that the wisdom writing comes easier now, that it's kind of flows, or do you still find that sometimes you're staring at the blank page?
Well, I write on my computer when I
Yeah,
do, and what I do is I feel like I get into like where I'm channeling, and I use headphones. I listen to Pandora, and I tune into music that I like, and all of a sudden I get into this flow to where it's very soothing, very meditative, and it just, there's something about it that I really enjoy. And I enjoy, so where I've shifted though with writing is that I look at writing as a process of discovery. So by
yes.
writing, I can go into a subject. I remember I went to a talk one time in a group, and this woman talked about her whole life was about perfection and control. And I thought about what she said. And I said,
Carmen.
I like to explore that to myself. And so there's a whole big thing in the characters in the book about, in the Soul of Uncertainty, about perfection and control, where Buddy meets this mystical woman in Santa Fe, and who talks about the illusion of perfection and control, and so this dialogue that I wrote really triggered on this idea about our life is, we try to make it about perfection and control, but it's really, and I started to shift how I see perfection rather than an absolute standard as a dynamic, evolving state of being with its peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I had meant to, going back to the title, I had meant to ask you about the soul of uncertainty. And that's an interesting conjunction, soul and uncertainty. What do you have in mind there?
Well, I originally I was going to call the book Loose Ends, Learning to Love Uncertainty.
Uh-huh.
That
Yeah.
was a working title.
Yeah.
And the person that helped me with Dancing on the River, he said to me, this book seemed like magical realism from what he read. And I agreed, but and then I don't know, something came to me, this idea of what about the word soul? And I never liked the title, Loose Ends Learning, although it was a good title.
Yeah.
And it spoke to really the message.
Yeah.
But I liked the soul of uncertainty. It just felt right when I heard it.
Uh-huh.
And as I said, I originally was a novel journey, but then a fable for our times. I remember when I came up with that, how excited I was. But this word soul, I think that's really what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
I used to write poetry and write songs. And I put them all together as 4 computers. I just typed them up and I put a cover on it. And I said, Songs and Poems for All Souls. And so I used the word back then,
Uh-huh.
many years ago, the word soul. And soul's in a lot of books, but I remember I went to a workshop a few years ago down at Esalen that was sponsored by Sun Magazine. It's a metaphysical magazine out of North Carolina, and they had different workshops, and one was about the word soul, about writing about the soul and what does that mean. And I've thought about that a lot, and I've always thought about, for example, when you meet somebody or somebody sings, and you said, wow, they really have soul. And so it can mean it's one of those things, I think, that is kind of beyond words, that they're just not words that can describe it. But I started to look at, what do I mean by the word soul? And I remember in this workshop, we read several articles about the soul, and it's this ineffable feeling you have. You can't put in words, but I looked at it kind of like the essence of what is.
Sure.
Essence.
Yeah, right.
But what's interesting is that with an interview that I did recently about explaining how you find your soul of uncertainty, what I did is I looked at the word soul, and that's what I thought might be interesting to do right now.
Okay.
Look at the letters in the word soul, and you look at, what does the S stand for, right? If you really look at that word, it's the key how you find your own soul of uncertainty, so that you can navigate uncertainty, so that you can find inner peace in the midst of all this uncertainty. And so the S really stands for stillness, for silence. And when you tune into your stillness and your silence, you find a sense of spirit. And that's what the S really reminds you to do. It's a reminder. It's a daily reminder of, how do I find my own way, my own path to help me in these times. And the O really stands for openness, to be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking of things, and to be vulnerable, to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to reach out, to feel, to trust. And then you look at the U. What does the U stand for? And the U really reminds you to be unattached. And there's so many spiritual teachings that talk about when you get attached, and that's where all the suffering comes in. It's what the whole Buddhist thing is. What causes suffering is your attachment to certain results, to the way you want it to be. And so often people want life to be a certain way. They want people to be a certain way. They want their business to be a certain way. They want somebody to like them, but it doesn't work out that way all the time. And then they get devastated. So this idea of being unattached to the result, it doesn't mean that you still don't have dreams and goals and a vision for a better world. You still have to have that. But what happens is, you're always going to have goals and dreams. And when you achieve them, you're going to have other goals. And that's one of the ideas of the book. There's always going to be something else, because we're always evolving. We're always expanding. And so my idea about change, which I wrote about in Dancing on the River 7 years ago, is kind of shifted to, rather than change, I really look at how we expand, how we evolve. And so then we look at the L, and what does the L remind us of? Of love, right? Of love. And sometimes love is letting go.
You know what, that turns out to be a perfect wrap, I think, for this interview. It kind of summarizes the book and a lot of what you're about. So I think this is a good place for us to wrap it up.
Well, I think so too.
Okay, good.
Wow, I mean, it was just like perfect. You know what's interesting too, like sometimes when you improvise with music, there's a spot where,
oh, I know,
it's
the end.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm not as nearly an accomplished musician as you are, but I used to play recorder, and I played recorder with friends, and we would jam, and it was amazing how simultaneously you do this phrase and boop, that's the end. Yeah. So I want to end in my traditional way of saying, Mark Susnow, thanks for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, an honor, a privilege, and I think this was great. I feel very invigorated, inspired